hello to him as well. So I am so thrilled today to have Raychel Espiritu with us. Some of you might recognize her from her time when she was with the Alliance for SoCal Innovation. She deployed over 18 million in investments in the SoCal area, connecting investors and startups. So that's very exciting. She's been speaking at a lot of really big events recently. And she is also a co-founder for Women in Climate Tech and Finance. So please welcome Raychel to the Friday Coffee Meetup stage.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, my name is Raychel Espiritu. So honored to be here today. Yeah, thank you for Steve for that warm intro, and thank you to Rob as well for suggesting me to come speak. And I was really grateful to be here with you all. I'll share a little bit about my background, and then I'll get into a little bit about what I'm working on as well. So yeah, as Christy mentioned, I operated this capital access for about 2 years. It was a program that connected founders and investors. I didn't directly deploy the capital, but through the connections I made, helped $18 million of venture capital get invested in Southern California. So that was a big win. My background, I'm a marketing and communications professional. I don't like to say expert or guru. I feel like that's too self-important, but I do have over 15 years experience in the field. I use marketing strategies to help early stage companies with their go-to-market strategy and customer acquisition. So a little bit about my background. So before 2017, I worked with different marketing agencies and brands and such. But that was my first 2017 was my first experience working in venture capital. I got the experience to join an early stage VC firm that invested in hardware, pre-seed and seed stage checks, about 100 to maybe 600,000 K. Robotics, wearables, drones, IoT devices, all that good stuff. I operated the innovation lab. It was Southern California's largest innovation lab. We launched with LA Mayor Eric Garcetti at the time during Manufacturing Week. It was a super awesome space, similar to this, where it had co-working and an event space, but also a maker space, prototyping tools, and so forth. It was a space for the portfolio companies to operate and prototype and such. Is anyone here in the hardware space? No, because hardware is really hard. That's why. So it's very, very awesome experience. I got to work with some of the most amazing founders. And working with 3 investors was quite the experience because I got the opportunity to sit in the room, during demo days and pitch nights, and as the founders would come in and pitch and getting to hear their thought process as they're deciding who to invest in, who not, the reasons why. Really being a fly on the wall for 3 years, absorbing this information, it was super helpful. And then also working with the portfolio companies, helping them get access to resources, using my marketing background for their customer acquisition strategies. As again, a lot of you know, if you're building something, how you acquire customers is super important, and that's something that investors always want to know. Like, do you know your customer? How are you reaching them? How are you acquiring them? Are they staying? All that good stuff. So that was a great experience for about 3 years. And then when COVID hit, no one wanted to be in a shared space. No LPs wanted to invest in a hardware fund. It was supply chain was completely, in shambles. So, as a series of events, I went my separate ways. But that was what led me to the Alliance for SoCal Innovation for the Capital Access Program. And over those 2 years, I really got to see firsthand what makes a great founder, what makes a great pitch deck, and what ultimately investors are looking for. And I think through that experience, I was really able to see where I can be helpful because I'm hearing from investors directly the reasons why or why not they're investing. And a lot of times, especially at the seed stage, the idea is great, but how the founder presents, how they explain their idea, how they explain their business economics, like all these things, if it's not explained super concise and in a very direct way, it usually doesn't work out. And so as a result, that was a big inspiration for me for creating the Roar Studio. So this is a new venture I started with 2 other business partners, and for us, the goal was to provide educational content to support and empower female founders again, mainly around like financial knowledge, because what I've seen is that's usually the biggest gap with founders. You rarely do get a very like financially fluent founder that knows the ins and outs of venture capital and I can talk through all this. And especially we've seen that with a lot of female founders. So our vision is to support and empower women in that regard. The talk that I'm giving today is build the things you wish existed. And I'm going to share a little bit about my background. So, and again, the reason, the why, right? And again, if you're a founder here, can I see a show of hands? How many founders are in the room today? Awesome, we got quite a few. Glad you guys are here. So a lot of times, as a founder, or even, are there any marketers in here? Any marketers? Great, awesome. Any like product people? Yeah, some product folks. And like, how many of you are like slash? Like marketing slash product slash entrepreneur slash day job slash yes. Okay, there's a lot of us here, right? And that's and that's kind of the nature of this industry. And so for me, I'll be a little vulnerable and share. But before I do that, I actually wanted to do a mindful moment with you guys, if you don't mind. So this is going to help me a bit as well. So if you're ready, I invite you to either soften your gaze or close your eyes. Just begin to relax all the muscles in your face. And together, let's take a deep breath in through the nose. Exhale and let it go. Again, deep breath in through the nose, filling the lungs. Exhale and let it go. Last one. Inhale through the nose. Exhale. Let it go. When you're ready, open your eyes. Hey, nice. Vibe shifted in here. That's great. Wonderful. So, yeah, a little bit about my background. I grew up here in Southern California. Did not come from a wealthy family. Our family was very much working class. My mom didn't work or have a job, and my parents separated. And I just really saw firsthand the struggles that come, especially, and I think now with a lot of compassion, my mom's generation, where she grew up. I mean, you guys know anything about history? Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed this Equal Opportunity Credit Act in 1974, which really was the first time that women were allowed to have like business bank accounts or mortgages, credit cards, like anything like that, without having a male co-signer who was like a father or a husband, which it's not that long ago. I think that was like around the time my mother graduated high school. So I think about for her, like what her world looked like in growing up and just her challenges in terms of, the working world and such. So personally, I didn't have a great example of, a strong woman that was in the workforce and so forth. And for me, that's something now that I really want to embody. And I think about for other women who are also raising children and what that means for future generations. For me, that's a big inspiration for what I want to do to inspire and help other women to stand strong and to really succeed in the workforce. So I share that with you so you get a little bit of understanding about the why, right? The why is super important. And I've seen this a lot, again, with my experience with the Capital Access Program. It's called the SoCal Venture Pipeline. It's still in operation today. So if you are a founder that's fundraising, I definitely recommend you go and check it out. And so through the course of 2 years, I got to see over 800 pitch decks. I did monthly stand-up pitch sessions. We have 6 founders come in and pitch to a selection committee, and those that got accepted, we would introduce to investors. So you can imagine like 800 pitch decks, 6 pitches per month. I mean, it was a continual process of looking at decks and ideas across all sectors, right? It wasn't just hardware, it was, consumer, it was everything pretty much. And what's interesting is really understanding like the founder's why. Like, why are you doing this? And why are you the person to do this? That's a huge thing that investors look at because one, it has to be a super important, problem that you're solving. And also it's important that the founder has intricate knowledge and understanding of the problem as well. So that's something, so again, that's my reason for why I wanted to share a little bit with you, my background, and I think also, my marketing experience. It's always great to connect emotionally with folks, so you just get an understanding of where they're coming from and get people to really understand, again, the emotional why. So that said, that's a little bit of my why. I'm going to shift to some other learnings. So build the things that you wish existed. And you think about, well, in the process of building these things, what do you need? And in my experience, it's capital, vision, resilience, and community. So I'll talk a little bit about my experience with all of those. So again, with capital, my experience with the program at the Alliance, I really got to see, again, what makes a company venture backable. I think that's a really critical piece to understand, because there's a difference between like a small business or a great company and like a venture scale company, right? And if you think, on the investor side, they're looking for these 10x returns, right? They're looking to make money back within 3 to 5 years because they took someone else's money that they're now giving to you, right? So that's kind of the core foundation understanding. So unless your business kind of fits within that model, venture capital might not necessarily be the direct route, at least at this time. I mean, there's things could change, the market could change, there could be new technologies, but again, these are kind of like the key components that really make a company, investable. And so that's particularly in the consumer space. Again, if you think about other things, whether if it's climate or deep tech or something in that capacity, maybe it's like a 5 to 10 year window. There's very few, I think, investors that have a larger risk appetite that look at these large, like 10 to 15 years. But those are like the moonshots, right? These are like these huge things that are going to be groundbreaking and like completely change the world. So having that first, like that understanding about capital and capital markets is super important. And also understanding like what is an investable company. So that's the first experience. And then now thinking about vision, right? I think that's what's so admirable about entrepreneurs and founders is they have a vision for a better world. They see things that are in the marketplace that don't exist and that should. And so I think that's the super exciting part, is when a founder can communicate the vision and really help, like, again, if I'm on the other side of hearing the pitch, I really want to see what you see. Like, speak to me in a language that I understand that describes a better world. And again, kind of going back to the language that we understand, super important to be like straightforward and use terms that people understand and resonate with. And then we think about resilience, right? I mean, it's hard, right? Startups are hard, startups are challenging. Technology can be super challenging. I mean, there's so many things and a million reasons why you shouldn't do it. There has to be that thing in you that's like, I have to do this. And again, connecting to the why, right? That's, again, super important. And community, which again, I think is a reason why you're all here today. The importance of community. I just want to share some of my experiences with building community. So Women in Climate Investing and Finance, it's a community organization. We support and empower women who invest across all asset classes within the climate space. And so our goal there is to bring women together through quarterly gatherings where we can share knowledge and experience and make connections to really help women further advance in their careers. And for me, when I show up in the community space, I'm always with a give first attitude. I meet people and my intention is to understand what they do so I can see where I can help or what connections I can make. If I'm so focused on me and what I can take and who I can meet, I mean, I don't know if you guys have had that experience where someone's like, what do you do? I'm not, like, no, it must be treated like a transactional, like, oh, you get out of my way, you're not important. Like, that's just, it's not cool. Like, it's not, and it's one of those things where I think people are pretty perceptive, like we can tell, right? And it's not to say don't, waste your time like talking to someone that is not, nothing's gonna go anywhere, but it's an energy and it's an energy exchange as well. And maybe if this person can't help you, there might be something you can do to help them. And you never know what will happen down the line if this person will remember. Wow, because I had some amazing mentors who opened the door for me, who made introductions, who got me places. And so as a result, I continuously do that for others, where I mentor for my, at Cal State Northridge, where I'm a graduate. Like, there's a lot of places where I like to give back and give first. And so showing up in community with that attitude will not have an immediate ROI, but in terms of like, as a human being and how you show up, it's the laws of the universe. You give what you receive, right? You receive what you give, all of that, the law flow. So that's my spiel a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I'm building now. So the Bar Studio, again, it's an educational platform that supports and empowers female founders with financial literacy. I'll talk a little bit about let's see. So my business partners, we have an investor as a business partner, which has been super helpful because she is actively deploying capital. She is an impact investor. She has a finance degree. And so that's been super helpful, is having great people to work with. Our other business partner, Rebecca, has biz dev experience. She worked for a Series A backed startup. She worked for the UK government. Again, just really, really great knowledge and experience and connections. And you guys already heard my background, so you know a little bit about me. But the three of us together, so it's Rebecca, Alona, and Raychel, which is RAR. It's like a really simple name. We were trying to figure out like, what do we name this thing? And we were going through all these different, I don't know if you guys have gone through this process. We were like, well, branding and naming and this, what do we call it? And then you're like, oh, that domain is taken. And then, there's all these things. And so you're like, well, let's make up a word. And then it's like, Google, how do you make up a word like that? And then it's like, okay, we just use our initials. So that's how the things came about. And it's a virtual platform. It's a 4-week boot camp. And so I don't know if you guys have ever done like a workout boot camp, but it's like, it's intense and it's really concise, but you get a lot done in a short amount of time. And that's the vision for this. It serves essentially as a pre-accelerator. We did some customer discovery and we asked, women what stage they were at, pre-seed, seed, Series A, growth, beyond. Everyone was at pre-seed. I think that's a super important part. Doing the 0 to 1 in the first stages of building, I think that's what we saw as the most important piece. And again, that customer discovery helped inform us how we can tailor our content. And so during the course of these 4 weeks, really, what to expect is, we talk about the capital markets and, fundraising and all these things. And, also, especially like how to talk to investors. I mean, that's, again, a big piece that a lot of founders maybe don't know because you have experience working in a particular industry and that world, maybe you've like seen like HBO's Silicon Valley and you have like a slight understanding of that world, but I think it's super important to really hear it from an investor and someone who's worked in that space, what that looks like. So it's also a safe space for dumb questions, right? I think there's a lot of times, there's a lot of things, at least for me, and I'll speak for myself, I'm like, what is that? I didn't know what it is. People are using these terms and linguistics where I don't understand, but then I don't feel safe to ask. I don't want to look like I don't know. And so we've created a safe container for people to ask questions. And I think that's also something in my experience through the journey is that we're all here to learn. No one is 100% expert in every area. There's so many things to learn. And as things are adjusted, the 2021, there was a lot of venture capital that was invested and the average seed check grew exponentially. So if you talk to someone, a few years ago, like a seed round was maybe, like 500,000, but then 2021, your average seed round was like $1 to $3 million. And so so understanding things and having a space to ask these questions, I saw that it was like super important to provide a space. And that's what we're doing with our platform. And then, also pitch deck and storytelling. Again, really diving into the story. It's super important that founders be able to tell a story in a way that's relatable. I think that's like the most important piece is like just being able to tell the story and then also how do you present it, right? In a pitch deck, making sure the information is simple and digestible. And then, of course, financial statements, right? I mean, this is the piece. No one likes spreadsheets. Does anyone like spreadsheets? Like, a few. Okay, there's a few. A few people, maybe, right? But for the most part, I think a lot of us, don't want to spend too much time there. maybe you want to outsource it, you want like, to work with like your accountant or CPA, but also again, as a founder, you gotta really understand your balance sheet. You gotta understand cash in, cash out, profit margins, EBITDA, cash flow, like all that kind of stuff. And then thinking through like, okay, well, what is like, who's my customer? What are they paying? How fast am I acquiring them? What are those financial projections looking like? I mean, everyone in their pitch deck does that hockey stick, right? This is that. But the reality is it's not always like that. And so being able to speak to your financial projections in a way that shows a level of maturity and understanding, I think is super important, right? Because if you look at like successful pitch decks, you'll just, because once we get the once you give us your money, we'll be able to grow, right? I mean, and that's maybe the case in some instances, but not always, right? So really understanding your financial statements and your financial models, I think, is super important. And again, makes a founder, it's not guaranteed, but more likely to be able to speak to an investor and raise capital in a way that will be successful. And then of course, practicing your pitch, right? It's super important, being able to practice. And there were a few founders, we did our first pilot earlier this year, that even after 5 minutes of talking, so what do you do? What is it? What do you do? What it's so important. You have to be able to like pull back and just really straightforward say what you do. And I gave you the example again when I was at the hardware VC firm. Hardware means a million things to a million people, right? It could be phones, it can be this, it can be that. But we did a branding exercise where we talked about Mealy Capital. It's tech you can touch. Now that's a very, right, there's like alliteration, the T, and so you understand, hardware is tech you can touch. So thinking through like, well, that sort of concise tagline that just nails it, right? And it doesn't take up too much time. It's all words you understand. And so I would encourage any of you that are building or working on something, like get that like one sentence tagline, like straightforward, so you can really nail it. That's super important. And so we've created this space for founders to be able to work through that, work with mentors, and then be able to practice that pitch. So so this is essentially, for each one, this is what we do. And so thinking about also like how do you research and find your investors? So again, my experience with the Alliance, over 800 pitch decks that I looked at. So you can imagine I spoke to a lot of founders that were just like, can you connect me to an investor, this and that and that. And it's, I totally understand the zeal and the enthusiasm, but at the same time, what was super helpful for me to understand was like, well, what's your process? What does your investor list look like? Oh, anyone will know, because you need to like really understand, well, who in the market, like what, if again, just say for the sake, you're building a consumer app, right? This is a direct to consumer, it's e-commerce. You want to talk to an investor that it has consumer e-commerce background, right? You don't want to speak to someone in a different lane because yes, they might have the money, but it's not going to be able to help you. What the goal is for them to be able to provide also their network. So even just knowing that, the founder has made a list of potential investors that are right for them, that's something, again, that a lot of founders surprisingly didn't even know or think of. So I'm sharing with you today. So if you want any questions or feedback on how to make a list or where to find those resources, I'm happy to chat about that afterwards. And then of course glossary too, like to talk about a lot of the terms that are used in fundraising and in startups. I think that's super important. How am I doing in time?
Maybe like 5 more.
5 more? Okay, cool. All right. And then, this part too. So again, with my background in marketing, I've been able to really speak to like, how do you market? How do you define your audience? And it's really simple. If you think about like, what are you building? Who is it for? And where do they live online, right? So a lot of us as professionals, we use LinkedIn or we maybe use X, but there's these different social media platforms, but other additional like digital platforms that they live online. Or are there other like online like publications that they read and then digest? For example, like in climate, if you've heard of Canary Media, that's like one of the top like leading publications for climate news. So really like understanding like who is your customer, their demographic, and where they live online super, super important about like learning your audience. And part of that too is like the discovery process where you're actually talking to them and getting feedback to say, is this something that you want? Is this something that you would use? So we go through a lot of all that good stuff. And then, yeah, we did samples of right and wrong design choices. So, you know, people say there's no such thing as bad questions. Well, there is such a thing as bad design. And it's like, you know it when you see it. You know, you can't read it, or it's like this and that and that. I mean, I will say this isn't the best, so I'm not going to send an example of it. But, you know, it's like, you know, good design when you see it because it's seamless, it's flawless. There's certain things, the colors, they connect to different concepts, all these things. That's been something too, like when you think about when you're building a pitch deck of, you have just a few seconds. So Alona, who's our business partner, she says she takes 10 seconds looking through a deck. You know, like just clicking through the slide quickly. And then unless something really captures her attention, she, you know, like hone in on it. So really, so thinking through, okay, you have 10 seconds to really create like an impact with your pitch deck. Make sure it's super clear and super concise.
What typically caught our attention?
Oh, the business model. That's like big, like, okay, like the business model, like how they make money, because that's what they're doing. That's like how they can make their money.
We're gonna
So-
take Q&A at the end so we can have the mic because we're doing a LinkedIn live feed. Cool, thanks.
And then of course, brand and strategic positioning. This is something if you think about brand equity, you know, branding is essentially what other people say about your brand when you're not there. So how do you build your brand? How do you build equity in your brand? Talking through a lot of these things. Even if you think about like strategically long term, if you want to roll out additional brands under the umbrella, for example, Procter and Gamble, right? You know, they have this huge brand and they've got Clorox and this and that, and that's obviously like in the consumer side, but there's so many different, you know, aspects of that. Even if you think about Slack, right? Slack and how they have these other products within the products. Zoom is a good one too, right? It's video conferencing, but now they have chat and whiteboards and all this. And so really thinking through the brand identity, essentially how you strategically position it in the market. And then of course, you know, the financial statements, really understanding this, excuse me. And I think as a founder, if I can communicate anything today, it's super important that you really understand your business, how you make money, and then being able to communicate that as well. And we provide templates as well for the financial modeling, which can be helpful, especially if it's not your wheelhouse and you really want to understand, you know, how to speak to that in an intelligent way. And then of course, networking is super important, you know, being able to meet other founders and connecting with our mentor network. Between myself and my other two business partners, we've really amassed a great network. And again, because it comes from this community first mindset, and we're always looking to see where we can give and give back. So we've had tons of folks, and I think, you know, Rob was one of them that was like, hey, how can we help what you guys are doing? And so, you know, it's great because again, community is super important when you're building something. So if anything, make sure that you know, come to these spaces with a very like give first attitude. And that's it. So this is my information. And if you want to connect, add me on LinkedIn, but happy to chat. So thanks.
That was amazing. Inspired. We are going to do Q&A. John, do you want them to come to the back? Because I take down the table.
Yes, please. If you have a question, please come to the microphone here in the back of the room and see somebody coming out. But I'll ask Rachel a quick question. How long has Raj Studio now been live?
I'm just gonna add one more thing about our questions. We like really short questions here, like a sentence with a question mark at the end. But if you have stories or comments that you'd like to talk to Rachel about, she will be here after, so feel free to share them then. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy. So how long has our studio been live? We launched it February of this year. We just did one cohort. We're launching cohort 2 in May. So it's only been since the beginning of this year.
Hi, Matt Skater. Yeah, I was just wondering, could you break down the biggest problem you've had to solve through your career? Just any story.
Wow, the biggest problem I've had to I think if I to be honest and a little vulnerable here, just talk directly, is really deciding like where to put my energy when it comes to like joining a company. So I've had the experience in like being an employee. I think part of that, the biggest challenge sometimes is like, yes, I have a boss, but then I have colleagues, and it's like really like the navigating people and like the dynamics of the team. That to me has been the most challenging piece, because even if I show up, 100% great positive attitude, like the dynamics of people, and everyone's also trying to get ahead, trying to get the promotion. Some people that really just are doing the bare minimum, and like navigating all of those dynamics. So I think that has been the most challenging. And then also too, as someone who's like building and launching something, is then having other like co-founders that are on the same page and wavelength that want to put in the same amount of time and effort, right? So on that side, it's like, how do you also navigate, well, I'm pulling on the weight here, like, and the kind of navigating those conversations. It's always been, I think, the biggest challenge. It hasn't been doing the work, because like you love to do the work, do it, right? But like sometimes people, it's hard.
If you like your job, it's not a job.
Yeah, if you like your job, it's not a job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vince.
Anybody else have a question?
Good morning, Rachel.
Hey.
I asked this question, I guess, off mic, so now I'll ask it again, but a little bit more precise. You mentioned your colleague reviews a lot of decks, and you said she only has 10 seconds to see if something that interests her. So what catches her attention? And if it's a business model, isn't that commonly communicated in a chart, spreadsheet, which is going to take a little more than 10 seconds to see if it's interesting?
Sure, yes. So a lot of times, looking at a pitch deck, you see, okay, here's the name, here's the idea, and you get that, right? And then what you're really looking for, again, this is what she's told me, is that when you get to the business model, sometimes it's not always the chart, right? Because that's more of like the nitty-gritty financial details. The part where it's like, who's your customer, and like how, like how are you engaging with your customer? What service or product do you provide the customer, right? And so really like understanding, and then what are the tools around that to do that? That's the most important piece. And a lot of times I've seen it as well, where founders will talk about, it's complex because it's a new idea. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this thing, and there's going to be that list and this platform. But, it's like, it's yes, maybe it's complicated, but it's important to really distill the business model down in just a very direct way of like, and again, this comes back to like having the tagline clear up front. Because if that tagline is clear up front, and like what you do and how you do it and who you serve, then the business model is going to be, very clear. And it's going to be, really understandable. And especially she talks a lot about like the unit economics as well, kind of like understanding that piece, because most likely there might be something already in the market, and it's like, well, how can you acquire assets better than this person, or how are you acquiring customers better than this person to position you better, for the long term. Hopefully that's helpful. We can chat more if you want.
I've got a series of questions for you.
Yeah.
So I like numbers, I like data, and so you mentioned that you looked at 800 pitches or pitch decks. Can you tell us about how many of those got funded, or how many of those did you thought that met the threshold for getting VC funding?
Out of the 800, only 2.
Out of 800, only 2. And we know the success rate of VCs, even though they only picked 2, but out of those 2, are those 2 companies still around today?
Yeah, they raised their Series A. They're still around. They're still growing. One of them is a female founder, Ashley Crowder with Ventana. Yeah.
She spoke for us.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. And then another one was like an ad tech platform. I think it's called like Gumball. It was like a ad tech background for podcasting and ads. So they're still growing, but there's so many. We also have had the case of where founders, again, if anyone is an investor in the room, where we passed on them, or we said, oh no, we don't think this is going to work, so they didn't get accepted. And then they still went and raised capital elsewhere, right? And then, you hear that all the time. There's a lot of things, oh, this isn't going to work. When you think about the people that pass on like Facebook and Uber and all that, there's a lot of those situations that happen.
but I'm sure they learned a lot from the meeting that they had with you guys to perfect their pitches. So what were some of the things that you were able to provide to these pitchers and to these founders that might have helped them hone their business model or their pitches a little bit more clearly, so that investors were interested or became interested?
Sure. So we had a very strict vetting process where we would review the pitch decks and the applications. You know, based on that data, we'd bring them into the next round where it would be where I would usually like do a one-on-one chat with them, or, you know, again, depending on the strength of the company. Usually there's a lot of like questions that we wanted to understand beforehand. So getting a handle on that. And then we have 6 founders pitch per month. So you have to think, if I'm seeing, you know, 10, 20, 30 pitch decks, out of those, only 6 get the chance to pitch. And so that's, you know, I don't know, again, I don't know if the math that goes out to there, but it's at least 6 founders per month that had the opportunity to then potentially be a part of the program. And so what ones that didn't get accepted, it's usually like, you're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. There's not, because a lot of times it's, and this is something too I have to communicate, whereas the capital shouldn't be a plug in a sinking ship. It should be the fuel in a rocket ship, right? And that's what is super important to understand, where people were coming, oh, we're raising a seed bridge. Like, ooh, you know, that's like, well, why didn't it's just Series A from your seed? Like, what's that, right? And we understand that's a lot of times the valley of death where a lot of startups fail. But again, that seed bridge is usually seen as like the plug in the ship, right? You want to, investors want to pour capital into something that's like taking off. So I think that was really one of the biggest takeaways, is that, you know, founders just weren't growing fast enough and they weren't ready. They weren't really at the inflection point, or they didn't necessarily have their, you know, whatever their product or service or whatever it was, like set up in a way that would, you know, equal a 10x return. I think those are some of the biggest pieces. Oh, sorry, please talk.
Hi, my name is Cindy, and I have a question about those who came to pitch but didn't make it.
Mhm.
Do you ever invite them back to try again, or is it one shot and done?
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting because, again, I was just the middle person between the founder and the investor. And so the founders would come back like, well, what about this? What about that? And I'm not even the one deploying the capital, but I kind of, once I already had that first impression, it was really hard to change it otherwise. You know, I was like, you know, it was really hard to be like, okay, well, I don't really see how this change that you made could really make a difference, unless it exactly had to do with, I have 2 other investors and I just need another 50K to close out the rounds. Like, okay, sure, right? Or it's like, wow, I have 200% growth over the last 2 months because we unlocked this market using this partner and this, you know, very like explosive growth, right? Those are kind of the only 2 things that would, again, really change my mind, which I heard from the investors would change their mind. Because other than that, it's like, you know, you're just trying to do not the change. What about now? What about this? What about this? And it's like, it's really about the numbers when it comes to raising capital. So.
You have a question?
I didn't raise my hand fast enough earlier to be the hardware nerd, but I was wondering if you had any insights on the sort of hardware products and companies and the investment.
Yeah,
there.
sure. Well, so what we saw is that a lot of founders sink a lot of capital in building the prototype and the MVP, right? And so even if you use like 3D printing, even if just say you like own a 3D printer, like what it takes to actually like build that and then get that prototype in the hands of your customers. So if you think, let's just say you build something in the prototype and you have like 10 customers and then they're like, yeah, we'll buy it. Okay, let's build. And then you do a supply chain order of 500,000. And the next thing you know, ooh, this one part is broken. Ooh, this doesn't work. You know, and then it's like all of that. So the prototyping process, I think, was like the most challenging, and being able to really get the prototype, but like also just core MVP enough, not to where there's all the bells and whistles and all the additional things, like core MVP for the physical product to where it's workable and you have enough feedback. and you've done everything you can to break it and it works, and then going to actually like the supply chain order. I think that process was where, so sometimes founders get like super lucky and it's because it's like simple, they can do that. But, you know, again, if it's very intricate, there's a million parts, and then even certain things of like, where are you ordering from China? Like, you know, all that kind of stuff is like the most challenging. So I don't have an answer for that either. Yeah, of course.
One last question.
Sure.
Can you give us an example of traction in terms of numbers? Like when somebody approaches to you and give you a pitch, can you give us an example of how the numbers look like?
Sure, for each round. So pre-seed is your, you know, sort of pre-product usually. So, but at least pre-seed, you've talked to at least 10 customers, right? I think that's usually what they want to know, that like you've talked to at least 10 customers who have said yes, who've done some like customer discovery. Also, it can be helpful if you have like a certain amount of your own capital you've invested. So I put in 50,000 of my own money, or I have 10,000 from friends and family. Non-dilutive funding, so any grants too, that's like super helpful. That's a great signal to show, because you can get money from the government, that's takes a long time, and you know, and so being able to have some non-dilutive capital is super helpful. Seed stage, it all depends on the industry, right? So like if it's a consumer product, it's usually like there's certain, and especially if it's like SaaS, there's like very specific metrics around SaaS, where I'm sure it's probably changed, but the last time I was like working in that space, it was really like at least like, you know, 10 to 20K MRR, which is like the monthly recurring revenue, like minimum, right? There has to be some form of like minimum, and then usually like a like 10 to 20% incremental growth each month, right? So if you're building, so, and that's for that specific business model. Because it's, again, it's a little more predictable and the numbers are there, but you know, based on like other industries, if it's like a consumer product, right? Just say you have like, you know, a beauty product or something like that's also, there's different numbers around that. They want to see usually just a certain, at the seed stage, it's like, you know, they want to see a certain amount of revenue, at least paying customers. And then Series A, it's 100% all numbers, which it's like still all over the place based on the vertical. It's hard to say off the top of my head, and I wouldn't want to be quoted on saying the wrong thing. But there's definitely there's definitely a lot of other like platforms and investors that share their specific metrics. And we have this too. I have another deck that goes through that, so I can share that with you guys afterwards. Yeah.
Great.
It's in the hot seat. Woo.